Good evening. My name is Craig Rice. I want to thank you for coming to We the People Required Watching. This is a series that's stimulated by films that are selected to sort of open up conversation. I want to thank, first of all, if there are Q&As that you have, questions that you want to ask, please type them in the Q&A button. I will get to them as soon as I can in the context of the show. Also, I want to thank members of the Film Society. The Film Society is a nonprofit that is dedicated to independent international cinema. We want to thank you for belonging to this organization. If you're not a member, please think about joining. MSPFilm.org is the site. If you want to just support the organization, go to MSPFilm.org for more information. This film is made possible by Penny and Bill George Foundation, Kelly and Mike Palmer, and Knock. And I want to thank you for joining. It's very important that we have you involved. Tonight, we're doing a film called Strong Island, which is, I find this film incredible. I find the director, Yance Ford, who is also the producer, an incredible filmmaker. This subject is intense, it's hard, it's truthful, it's honest. This is truly, truly a personal film. It's full of depth and emotion and feeling. The film depicts the sorrow of a family, but also deals with universal humanity, which I think is really important, especially when you're dealing with Black films, which we very seldom see that level in ourselves. I want to talk to you, Yance. I want to thank you for coming here. This is a hard one, I know. I mean, Black people basically live sort of have two lives. They have a double life. They have a life that they live for white people, because that's how we learned to survive over the centuries, you know, and then we have a life that we live around Black people. You have really, in this film, you delve deep into that personality of being Black, but also beyond that into your humanity. And I want to know, what was it about making this film that you believe that was the best direction to take?
Yeah, you know, first of all, Craig, thank you for having me and for sharing Strong Island with everyone who follows the MSP Film Society. You know, when I was making Strong Island, I really was aware of how the narrative of my brother's death had literally taken a three-dimensional person and reduced them to a single dimension. And you know, along with the flattening of my brother and his life and, you know, the details of what happened the night that he was killed, everything got flattened. And so for me, the way to tell the most truthful story about him as an individual was to tell it in all of his complexity. Because I think that in his complexity, you know, for example, the irony of the fact that he was going to be a corrections officer. You know, like all of those details help to bring back in full relief the person that he was. And, you know, I think the broad focus of also, you know, the way that my family revolved, you know, in our world and the way that he fit into our family was important, because you've also, in films about Black life, you often don't get a sense of who the person is who has been lost. And I think that the best way to get a sense of who the person is to see how they've impacted other people's lives. So that's why I thought that all of the dimensions were really important.
I mean, normally in films, you know, films are usually are driven by action, direct action. But in this film, it really is about, the plot's not moved forward that way. It's really moved forward by your deep, almost tactile revelations. You know, I'm just amazed. I mean, because that's not something you see very often, especially not from a filmmaker. Usually we're behind and making other people do that, you know, but you really got into that. And I really want to talk to, why was that approach, did you feel that was the most effective? I think it was the most effective, but why did you feel that way? From a
well, I didn't actually think it was the most effective at first. You know, I tell the story a lot. I had a list of 10 rules at the beginning of making Strong Island, and Yance will never appear on camera was like the #1 rule. like it was the top of the list.
And you missed it, right?
And I missed it. Well, what happened was that, the sort of the heart and soul and the moral compass of the film, my mother Barbara, passed away. And when she died, I realized two things, that I had been hiding, um, in a way, from having to be as honest and revealing about how my brother's death had affected me as I had been asking other people to do. And I also realized that she, her character needed, another character to hand off, the sort of the role that she had played, in the film too. So, we didn't start shooting my interviews until, gosh, my mother passed away in 2012. I think that my first interview was in 2000 and maybe 14, 15. I'd have to go back to my tape log, which was many years after I began production of the film. So, I in hindsight realize that I entered the process as a character at exactly the right time, and it, because of the way in which we shot those interviews, we created this sort of black void in which my character existed, divorced from time and from place. The entire sort of construct of my character's world it just worked. It just worked.
Why do you feel that you were hiding, or what were you hiding from? Maybe is a better question.
I was hiding from that still present sense of guilt, right? Which I think, Black people, living with violence and the ever-present threat of violence, and I think it's common just in general, but I think especially with Black people, there is this thing where it's like, if I had done X differently, maybe the outcome would have been different.
Do you think that did you think it's based on what you felt, that you, by lying to your mother, was part of, complicit in this?
Yeah, I mean, it was like that 19-year-old voice, right? The voice of that 19-year-old Yance that was like, you should have told your parents. That voice still hasn't left me. I know how to talk to that voice now. I know how to reason with that, with that 19-year-old me. But, I was struggling with a very deep sense of guilt that I had not done enough to prevent my brother from getting into a situation where he could get in trouble. I mean, the extent that my brain took it at the time that he died was he could get in trouble. I didn't take it. Yeah, I never thought his life would be in danger. So at the very least, on the days when I was easy on myself right after my brother died, it was, I should have done more to keep him from getting in trouble. But at the extreme end of that spectrum, it was, if I had done more, he wouldn't have gotten killed. And that's what I was hiding from.
Yeah, but again, I mean, it gets to a point in time, as a Black man, you understand sometimes you want to stand your ground too. I mean, and that's what, and so I don't know, you could have told your parents if you wanted to, but I mean, it didn't mean.
And it wouldn't have changed anything about what he would have done that night, because, the mechanic in the film followed my mother and my brother's girlfriend home. That's one of the things that, Strong Island is a Rorschach test for what people are willing to hear. And so one of the things that is really important about, when you get toward the end of the film, if you're listening to what the detective says, he sort of, it's a little bit of a throwaway line. He's like, well, there's something about, Riley following your mother home. And because of that, your brother goes to the garage. So, my mother was followed home by this mechanic who had been, engaged in all kinds of shady behavior. And he would have gone there regardless. I would have gone there regardless. He had a right to be angry.
Yeah. One of the comments that your mother makes is about not raising you and your siblings in a way that maybe didn't totally understand the danger of white people. Being in America, I mean, my parents basically Wade probably did that to the excess, but do you think that was part of a problem, that your brother didn't understand that by doing that, that's going to possibly be the outcome?
Yeah, I think the mistake. Um, I think that my mother assumed that by getting to the suburbs, that the threat of violence that black men face was somehow at a farther distance from my brother than it actually was. You know, and I think that that's when she talks about the mistake that she made. I actually think that she's referring to. I mean, there are two things. She says that she regrets raising her kids to see character and not color, which is something that that is a statement that upsets a lot of people. Um, I don't I don't find it upsetting because she's true. I mean, she's right. If my brother had, you know, if my brother had been in an argument with a black person, he wouldn't be dead,
Right,
right?
right, right. Yeah,
And I do think that there was something about being in the suburbs that my mother thought was safer. And the mistake that she made was realizing was forgetting for a moment that that safety is something that doesn't follow black people. Danger is something that follows black people, and she knew that, right? She knew that. I think that she was hoping that all the sacrifices that she and my father had made to get us to Long Island would be a barrier between us and the life that we would have to live unmitigated by their protection at some point.
right. I mean, and that's part of that comes from those years and years of black people struggling and hoping and praying that this was going to be over with someday. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's totally understandable. You know, they were she believed that, and also I think part of this is redlining, which is kind of what. I forgot the name of your area.
Central isolate.
Yes, this isolate. Right. Is that any 2 blocks in any direction, you actually have entered new territory. I don't know if people understand this. I mean, growing up in sections, which I did here in Minneapolis and
Mm,
St. Paul, both, they were both red line neighborhoods, and that you could not go several blocks in any direction without understanding that you were walking into danger.
right.
And where the situation with your brother, I mean, him driving down the street and turning the corner, he actually had gone out of what was the safe zone into dangerous territory.
Yeah.
And I don't think people totally understand how that worked. And at that time, they think that we talk about Black Lives Matter and police violence, but there was a time when white boys killed and got away with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Central Islip and the boundaries of the neighborhood where I grew up. It was a black neighborhood, black civil servants, teachers, corrections officers, nurses. My father worked for the Transit Authority, a lot of Transit Authority workers, MTA. And so that neighborhood, we had the run of that neighborhood growing up. Our parents and every other parent in the neighborhood could open the door or open the garage on Saturday morning and not worry about where their kids were going to be and whether or not they were going to be safe. But there were those invisible lines, especially because my brother had never been to this garage before. He didn't know it was a chop shop. He figured out as the sequence of events started to unfold. He figured out that there was something fishy going on there, but he didn't know from Adam who these people were running this place. So and the fact that it was his criminal enterprise just on the edge of our neighborhood says so much about how thin that red line actually is. Like you can think like you've been boxed in, and sure you have a sense of safety in this neighborhood, but you sometimes forget what's just across the street is an entirely different world.
Yeah. And you're not welcome here. Um, One of the things somebody just asked, has your brother's case been reopened? I don't know if that's a possibility since it was never brought up,
Yeah,
so.
it's not a possibility that the person who killed my brother was never charged, and the charge that was brought before a grand jury was manslaughter, and the statute of limitations on manslaughter. That the facts as I understand them, the charge wouldn't rise to murder as the way the law defines murder, and so because the statute of limitations has expired on manslaughter, and because my family didn't bring a civil suit. No, the case has not been reopened, and I don't really see, from my perspective, the need for the case to be reopened. I mean, because I don't expect that there would be a different outcome today than there was 28 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the detective, and I can't remember his name right now, was pretty direct and honest with you about what was going on. I mean, and what you were trying to do from the beginning of this film was really trying to explore. You were trying to find some understanding. You were looking for justice. I know that was kind of the motivator, even if it was in the past. The lack of justice can destroy. We know that. You were looking for some level of that to release yourself, and I thought he was pretty honest about that. In that process, though, did you find for yourself an understanding of the system, of the legal system? I mean, you know, the court systems. Then, how was that for you?
Oh
Were
yeah.
you did you go to the courthouse at all during the trial, or I mean, during the hearing? So,
Yeah, I remember going to the courthouse. I remember, I mean, when grand juries are going on, you have to remember that they're secret proceedings. So you can be sitting in a hallway in a courthouse, and like, I remember sitting in the hallway waiting for my mother to come out from her grand jury testimony, but you never saw anybody. Right, and that was deliberate. They kept witnesses separate. They never called people on the same day, and from what I remember, I just remember empty hallways and lots of and no one present. Um, but what I learned about the legal system, I have learned and I have talked to many assistant district attorneys who say who have said to me that this returning a true bill in this case was an extraordinary um, thing, and the sign that something was very, very wrong in the way that it was presented, or in the way in which the grand jury actually considered the evidence. I've had every single ADA who's seen the film say that to me. So I know that DAs have extraordinary power. Assistant DAs have extraordinary power. And grand juries are, I understand why they're anonymous. Obviously, you need to protect people, but I don't think that grand jury testimony and grand jury transcripts of deliberations should be confidential. I think especially when no true bills are returned, I think it's important to see that there was sound reasoning for a grand jury to arrive at the decision that it made. And if the reasoning is not sound, or is not legal, or is not based in the law, then I think that there should be a remedy for that. And what I've learned, making Strong Island and also just being Black in America, is that there are lots of things that are wrong with our criminal justice system, and there is no remedy for most of it right now, which is why I think this moment that we're living in now is about so much. It's about police brutality and violence and murder, but it's also about the fact that our criminal justice system is so broken and has been for so long that we need to fix it.
and one of the things that has questioned me, and probably other people that seen the movie, is the thing with the limo. I mean, I still can't believe they didn't explore that, because again, having been if you grew up in the streets, you know how things are supposed to happen. I mean, but and his friend Kevin sees this is not how it's supposed to go down. So, did you ever find out what the limo was about, and what was going on behind the scenes? Why he wasn't in handcuffs, and why he wasn't put in the squad car? What?
Sure. So the auto body shop in question was owned by a prominent real estate developer at that time, who had a lot of political connections in Suffolk County. And his name was Thomas Daytree. Tom Daytree Jr. owned, quote unquote, owned the body shop. That family, was very connected at that time. So even though I cannot prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt who was in that car, I can reasonably deduce that the person in that car that evening was Tom Daytree's father. And I can say that, just sort of as a side note, the person who owned that garage, Tom Daytree Jr., a few years ago created an environmental catastrophe at Roberto Clemente Park in Brentwood and other locations around Suffolk County, dumping toxic construction debris all over these sites. But the remarkable thing about this sort of criminal activity, skimming off of contracts, no-show jobs. I mean, the Daytree story of corruption in Suffolk County was a huge story a couple of years ago. The remarkable thing is that they got to set the terms of their punishment. So nobody went to jail, right? I think that some fines were paid. Daytree Jr. was allowed to clean up his own toxic mess, and now the state of New York is spending millions of dollars having to redesign and clean up this brownfield that was created by Tom Daytree Jr.'s continued criminal activity. The way that case played out just a couple of years ago just speaks to how deeply broken the criminal justice system in Suffolk County, New York is.
One of the things that in your film that I think you're really effective is, because of the structure of your film, is that we get to know William in a lot of levels. We get to know him, his friend, a couple of them. We get to know him, the DA, by trying to save this guy who was mugged. Was that part of your strategy to get the audience engaged in the family? I mean, because it's just about that. We become members of your family, but because there's an incredible thing that you do by the photos. I mean, that's a touch, the family album. So you see love and joy and happiness and, parties and people getting older and babies being born. So the audience now becomes part of the family. Was that a strategy that you were going for here?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was make a dead black man film, right? The last thing I wanted to do was to make a dead black man film, and the opposite of that is, who was this black man when he was alive, right? And who was in this person's life? What were their hopes? What were their dreams? What were their struggles? My brother left behind his diary. He left behind his workout book. He left behind his plans for the future. He left a map of his life up until the moment that he was killed behind, for us to understand and get to know him and all of his struggles. And for me, part of telling the story of his death was to give you a sense of the person that he was, to help you understand why he wound up at the garage that night. The same person who chased a guy with a gun, who had shot someone at an ATM in downtown Brooklyn. Of course that person is going to go and have a confrontation at this chop shop. Of course he's going to threaten to call the police. Of course he's going to say, I know what's going on here. Of course that person's going to try to be the hero. He's been the hero once before.
He believed in justice. I mean, that's one reason why he wanted to go into law enforcement, or at least in protection. I mean, that he believed in it, because you hear him talk about it, and even his friends talk about it. That's what even when he defends his friend in school, he believed in justice. And that's kind of this irony of all this, is that somebody who believed in justice so deeply does not get it.
Exactly. And I mean, which is why when my mother says, wait until we get to court, it's why it's one of the most devastating moments for me in the film, because it's like she's not saying, wait until I go get my own gun, wait until I get this guy alone in a room, or wait until I get out of here, and no, her thing is wait until we get to court. And when she gets to court, what does she see? People reading, having conversations, books, magazines, not paying attention to her testimony at all. Yeah, it's ironic.
Yeah. In the talking, getting back to the photographs, because I really thought that approach was really effective. In it, how and why did you decide to do it? Sort of lay them out that way, move them around. I mean, it's just instead of doing it full frame, or animation or whatever.
Sure, I don't like animation. Just as my personal aesthetic, I always like. You used the word tactile earlier. I love film that's tactile and it feels like it has texture. That honestly, my work study job when I was at Hamilton College was taking photographs at the school museum, and so I had worked with a copy stand, which is essentially a camera pointed downward, and to document the print collection. And when I was thinking of how we would shoot those photographs, I wanted them to feel like objects. I wanted them to look on screen like the way that we look at photographs. So that's really how it came, to be. And cinematographer Alan Jacobson, he put a C300 on a jib arm, and literally I was able to just move the camera up and down and really explore the photographs with the camera in the same way that I would look at them with the naked eye.
I mean, I think that's really effective because, again, I think that whole feeling that bringing us into the family was such a powerful thing, because you're there. It looks like you were looking at a family album with somebody else and saying, this is this, and this is the wedding, this is the graduation, I think that's a really an effective thing. One other thing that also I really love was, and you have to explain to me, how did you, when you decided to be on camera, which is, again, I mean, we're doing it right now, but, you and I've talked a few times now, so it's not so strange, but you were talking to the camera like you were talking to somebody. How did you get so emotionally committed and deep into that?
I was actually speaking to someone, but I was pretending that I was alone in this room. So for the film, I was interviewed mostly by a filmmaker named Rob Moss, and also by the producer of the film, Jocelyn Barnes. And so I had a wall of sound blankets in between me and everybody else on set. So all I could see literally were two cameras, a white mark on each lens for my eye line, and I could hear over the wall what my questions were. There was a monitor back there; they could see me, but I didn't want to see anybody else. I knew that if I was going to tell the truth, and allow myself to say things I had never said before, that I needed to have this sense of not being observed. And for some reason I was able to disconnect in a way and just treat the cameras as almost like mirrors. And I was having the kind of inner conversation with myself on camera. I think that's really the key to it.
I think it's very effective. You had a really strong support staff. I mean, producers, executive producers. And how did Denmark get involved in this?
Sure. So part of how Denmark got involved, the film is produced by Louverture Films, and Jocelyn Barnes, the producer, Danny Glover, the executive producer. They do a lot of international co-production. When I decided that I needed to sort of start over from scratch, it was at a moment in the film festival calendar when most of the editors that I was interested in working with were finishing films for Sundance. And Jocelyn said, listen, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but there is something oddly Danish about this film. And, like, if it's okay with you, I'm going to reach out to a couple of people that I've worked with in the past, and, see if there might be an editor that we should go and talk to. And we went to Copenhagen and met with Yance Ford and Sina Sorensen, who Sina owns the company Final Cut for Real. They produced The Act of Killing, The Look of Silence, and lots of other fantastic films. And Yanis is an accomplished editor. We spent 4 days watching like almost all the rushes from the film. And at the end of that time and the conversations that we had around the material, it was really clear to me that Yanis was the editor that I wanted to work with. And so that was August of 2015, and September, I packed up and moved to Copenhagen, and I was there for, I was in Copenhagen for a year. I came home a couple times, and my partner came and visited me a couple times, but I lived in Copenhagen for a year. It was quite an experience.
That's great. That's a great experience. And obviously, the quality of the film is really exceptional. In this film, there's something that really radiates, and I'm just going to ask you this and just kind of decide how you want to. Part of this film feels like the death of your brother and the lack of justice destroys your family. I mean, your sister, I think, is still alive. I don't know that. You'd have to tell your sister is still alive and well. And
yes, she's alive and well.
Okay. Um, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's exactly my experience of my brother's death. It did destroy my family. Um, my family before my brother died, my family before my brother was killed is a different family than the one after he was killed. My father had a massive stroke the year after my brother died. I attribute his stroke and his death 3 years after that directly to my brother's death. And there's lots of research about trauma that sustains that belief. But my brother's death picked up my family, and like just the four of us who were left picked us all up from our lives that had been over here, moved us, set us down over here, and it was like you're in an entirely new place. You're in an entirely new world. The rules have all been changed, and more than anything else, you are now without. You are now without your son. You are now without your brother. So literally, my family was destroyed and reconfigured into something new. But also emotionally, the weight of my brother's death was something that we all had to figure out how to live with over time. Um, and I believe that his grief, and anger at my brother's murder is what killed him. My mother, she lived for 20 more years after that, and she died too young. I think that her grief and regret over my brother's death is contributed to her death. My sister and I are still here. We're very, very close. But each of us have had to make a new way in the world because the Yance that I was the day before my brother died is a different person. Was a different person. That person is no more. And the same thing, goes for my sister who was 16 when he died and had to really figure out how to go through life without, her best friend. They did everything together. They were running buddies. And that was really difficult for her to overcome.
You think this dealing with this grief and grieving, which interesting enough, is Black families are not always good at this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we
Mm-hmm.
sort of take. I mean, because death is so much a part of what being Black is. I mean, it doesn't so much surprise you, or but we do have a tendency to become very stoic about it. And your dad's response is very similar to what I've seen in my family about this. Do you feel that was kind of a contributing factor to keeping that everything inside, kind of?
Of course. I think in general, all of us were pretty stoic about losing William. I think that there was, my dad, a Black man of his generation would never have been, outwardly emotional about how he felt. I think that for the rest of us, there was this real sense that our own individual grief would overwhelm everyone else. And so what you wound up having were four people who were in incredible pain, were in incredible pain together, but very much alone in that pain. And I do think that Black families and Black people, I think now in general are better at talking about grief. We're better at talking about trauma. In the 1990s, that was a different time. There was no talk of self-care. That none of the things that people are talking about now in terms of sustaining ourselves during the struggle. No one was talking about that in the 90s. And so we didn't talk about it either.
It just kind of turns into this. I was compared to sort of, Ingmar Bergman movies where there's this silent scream. The real horror of life is inside, where but it's in there, but nobody talks about it. They just kind of walk around in this thing, and it,
Yep.
it's sometimes just, I think it's unfortunate that we get to that way. But again, we've had to live in a world where, death is part of what it is, and you never know from the moment you get up in the morning and walk out the door if you're actually going to be coming home again. And you have to accept that as your reality. And I think there's parts of that. I think that it's just a shame. I think if your family would have talked about it, we know this now. To your point, there may have been some way for everybody to deal with it in a much more healthy and more relieving way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think so.
yeah, because the aftermath, again, this is it's not that anybody's wrong. It's just it is what it is, and
Yeah,
that's
and
the
it's also
unfortunate.
just what do parents know? What do parents not know?
Mm-hmm.
People think
Mm-hmm.
that shielding your kids from grief is actually the best way, to help them deal with it. And now we know that that's not the case. There's also just the plain fact of people doing the best that they can when they find themselves in extraordinary circumstances.
I mean, we talked about yourself changing. Part of this film is obviously about your gender transition. Is this I mean, obviously, I don't know. You have to tell me. Did this come out of what you were feeling to become more your authentic self, or was that something that you had been thinking about before?
The film or my gender
Or
identity?
your gender identity.
No, I was very much aware of my gender identity from a very young age. I didn't have the language for it. I'm Generation X, so I didn't hear the word transgender until the 1990s. But I had always been aware, and my mother had always, we talked about it before she passed away. She's wonderful, unconditional love for me and my partner. Um, my mother had talked to me about, knowing that something was different,
Mm-hmm.
and as parents, sometimes know their children really well. So when I came out to her, it wasn't a surprise. Um, uh, and I think that part of making the film for me was about, because I had worked in a very prominent position at a PBS series for years before I told anybody that I worked with that I had even had a brother. And so, for me, part of making Strong Island was about putting an end to the hiding, of what this thing had been in my life, and also being who I am in the film. Um, you know, I just felt like there's nothing there's nothing of value in hiding. I don't gain anything by hiding, and I don't gain anything by keeping my brother's death a secret. And the manner in which he died, keeping that a secret doesn't serve me. So it was a very freeing thing, actually, to talk in the film about the person that he didn't get to know, which was part of, when you lose someone, part of what you lose is the relationship you could have had. The incredible thing about siblings is that, at a certain point in your life, your sibling is the person who has known you the longest. They know the most about you. And for me not to have that relationship with William, it was, is still an incredible loss.
Yeah, I mean, people losing siblings. I lost my brother, and he was like 14 months younger than me. I mean, they knew more about me than my parents did. I mean, they know, your entire life. They do know you, and I think there is something to what you're saying. So there really is a not hiding, being honest about your feelings. Really had a lot to do with you
Yeah, I
in
just
this. Yeah.
I got tired. I got tired of hiding. I got
Mm-hmm.
tired of lying. I got tired of the burden of keeping this tremendous secret as if it were something to be ashamed of. And when I realized that that's what was going on, I was able to move. I was able to move past that and really start making the film.
Yeah. How long did it take you to make this film, by the way?
From stem to stern, it was 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I say stem to stern, I mean, like, when I started, like, from the moment I started writing about the film as something that I wanted to do, to, like, when we delivered the DCP to Sundance for our premiere, it was 10 years. And that was a pretty, in some cases in documentary film, 10 years is nothing. 10 years is average. Sometimes it's on the high end of the scale, but still, it's not uncommon for some stories to take that long to unfold. And I also, I was working full time for many years that I was making this film. So I was, shooting on my sick days. I was shooting on holidays. I was shooting on weekends. I was going to work, and then coming home and working at night. So, I was doing I was doing I was hustling. I had a job and I had this thing I wanted to do.
You got that 9 to 5 and then doing it. But that's, that's kind of the type of film that you created in the legacy. But also you needed, the film needed that time.
Hmm.
To your point, you needed to come to terms with, the film that you wanted to make and the film that the film needed to be.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think that if I had tried to make the film when I was younger, or if I had tried to rush the progress of the film, I would have had a very different outcome. I actually, was glad that I started the film when I did, because I had so much more perspective on my brother's death than I did that if I had started it at a younger age.
One of the things in the film also is the sort of the value that I mean, white skin has a value, black skin has very little, if any, value at all. And I think it's the way the policemen, and obviously this, whoever was in the limo, I don't care who you are, limos do not come to crime scenes unless they're called, and there's clearly is a value system, and that's probably, I think, in this context of what I'm trying to do here with We the People and talking about the racial issues and the injustice and the justice and the racial inequality, is that it is definitely treated differently. And I don't care what anybody says, it is, it's
Mm.
not that white people do not get killed, they do, but there is a different process in there. The value system is there. In your process of researching, because I know there's a lot more research that you did than what you talked about in the film, what did you find out about this when you were doing the research?
Well, I mean, I can't quote the stats right off the top of my head because I don't have them in front of me and I don't want to get them wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But just the disparities in the number of people of color who are killed by police every year versus the number of white people, the number of people who the number of times, or rather the conviction rate, or even the rate of people being charged when they kill an African American versus someone who kills a white person. There are all sorts of disparities, that we have the data. It's not conjecture, it's not opinion, it's not me thinking things. There is data to support the fact that on the whole, if you are at any point in contact with the criminal justice system and you are white, you will have a very different outcome than you would if you were a black person. That's a fact. We know that. But also in the film, culturally, my mother talks about the currency of whiteness when she was growing up in Charleston, and she says this very insightful thing. She said that the kids weren't wealthy, but that their wealth was that they were white. And in the Jim Crow South, my mother and my father survived Charleston, South Carolina, in the Jim Crow South. The fact that my mother was able to articulate that whiteness was a currency then, and still is so important to understanding her experience, growing up in America, and also where her deep anger, at what happened to my brother comes from. It's not pretend. And I think that what we've seen over the last 10 weeks and all of the information that has come out, about other killings, and, all of the evidence that has been presented about the need for systemic change and how deep the systemic problems are, and how much danger Black people face when, just deciding to drive to work. I just think that you cannot overestimate the fact that we live in a society where there is currency on our skin.
Yeah. And I think that, one of the things about this series that I've been doing now is really wanting white people to understand is that there are white people who believe that we are their brothers and sisters. I mean, truly, deeply, right? And I believe that. But sometimes, we're heading into what my mother would say if she was still alive, uncomfortable times. People are going to have to pick a side, I mean, they're going to have to pick a side. It's because lip service will no longer do it, because we need to see it. We need allies. We need allies that actually will stand with us. We saw some of this during the initial protesting and riots, and that they're multicultural, multiracial, multi-ethnic, and I think that's part of it. But I mean, this is not. The end of this is not. We're not close to it, and I think it's only going to get more severe as we move forward. But we do need those kinds of things, and I know you understand what I'm saying. And I just think that part of what we have to do is to promote that seeing these films is just purely informative. It gives them a platform on which to understand, because for most Black people, have never expressed themselves to white people because they didn't think there was value. It's that statement that I think it was I can't remember who made this statement, but that peaceful means is only effective when people who you're talking to have a conscience. And I think that we have always been leery of white people and letting them know what we really felt and what we thought. But I think we're at a point right now where we need them to understand where we're coming from. But this is not the end we're at right now. We're just at the beginning of this, and we do need them to support and understand the level that they're committing to. And they do commit to us and say we are brothers and sisters, we are friends. Because there's a commitment to that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
There's a commitment to it, and I think that there's also a commitment to having justice be something that exists and is real for everyone, right? And I think that what happened with George Floyd was that finally a critical mass of Americans saw how very disposable Black lives are to some people in this country. And there was, that 8 minutes and 46 seconds of that tape shot by a 17-year-old. 17-year-old girl shot that footage. And some people are like, George Chauvin is looking at the camera. George Chauvin's not looking at the camera. George Chauvin is looking at the camera person. Right? It's important to remember that where his gaze is fixed. It's fixed on her. And so I think that, we have entered a moment in our history where there is no going back to what used to there's no going backward from here. There must be forward progress, or I don't actually know what kind of society we'll be living in. I think that it is now incumbent upon all people to say enough is enough, and enough has been enough, right? We should also say that enough has been enough, right? But this is the kind of thing, right? And this is why images are so powerful. This is the kind of thing that you cannot deny. What happened with George Floyd, that 8 minute and 46 seconds on tape, you can't deny it. And we know from our history, right, that when Americans are presented with images of things that they can't deny, that those are most often when change happens.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, I think you're right because it's not just that we saw the aftermath, or we saw him die. He was dead when they put him in the ambulance, because that was not ETMs that did that. That was officers knew he was already dead when they put him in there. So we saw him die. There was no rescuing. There was no pulse. There was nothing. He was dead. So I think that we probably have never seen that in complete action, and without any. And the girl, obviously, they didn't. She's there. She's taking this, and they felt. Again, it goes back to the value. They didn't value the fact that they weren't like chasing her off. They weren't. Hey.
There was no fear.
Yeah.
And there was no concern for repercussions. There was nothing.
Yeah.
There wasn't even the need to take your hands out of your pockets.
Yeah. Exactly.
The level of nonchalance is just it was remarkable.
For you in your life, and I know the next film you do, you don't want it to take 10 years to do.
No.
So what's next for you?
I am in early development on a project with the New York Times that I can't quite talk about yet, but we'll be talking about it in a month. And I'm also getting started on another project that I'm not sure that has to do with COVID-19 and the Black community.
Great. Just make sure that you keep the Minneapolis St. Paul Film Society in your mind when you get to that level.
Of course.
We'd appreciate that. I definitely think that. And I want to, this has been great for us to talk and to do this, Yance. I really, really appreciate you and your time and your energy.
Thank you for having me.
The film you made. And I think that hopefully an audience has a chance to see it. If they miss this, they can actually go to mspfilm.org and look for the recorded Q&A here. And I hope that your next project is any support that you need, just open up and reach out to people, okay?
I certainly will. Strong Island is a part of the Black Lives Matter collection on the Netflix Black Lives Matter collection on YouTube, which means that there's no paywall on the film on YouTube, and the paywall is actually down on Netflix for Strong Island as well. Oh. So now people who don't have the means to pay for Netflix, they can find it on YouTube, or they can watch it on Netflix for free.
That's great. That's great. Well, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank the audience for coming to this conversation. I want to thank Penny. I want to thank Penny and Bill George Foundation. I want to thank Kelly and Mike Palmer. I want to thank NOC, the Film Society. Thank you for joining us. MSPFilm.org. Please, next week, the week after next, we're going to be doing John Lewis, and hopefully everybody will be able to join us for that. Again, Yance Ford, great job. We're looking forward to your next film. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Good night.